The night air hung heavy with a strange stillness as Evelyn Holloway led her siblings through the tangled pathways of the orchard. The glowing fruit cast eerie, shifting lights across their faces, illuminating the tension that knotted their brows and tightened their jaws. Reverend Caleb Marks followed close behind, his voice low and measured, reciting the ancient incantation he had reluctantly agreed to share. Harriet Bell lingered at the edges, clutching her notebook like a talisman, her eyes darting nervously among the twisted branches. This was the moment they had feared and prepared for, the ritual to either end the orchard's insatiable hunger or bind it once more in a fragile stasis. Evelyn's heart pounded, a mix of dread and determination fueling her every step. She glanced at Lucas, who bore the strain of sleepless nights and reckless defiance in his restless eyes, and then at Margaret, pale and trembling, but steadfast in her trance-like focus. As Caleb's voice rose in a chant, the orchard seemed to respond. The branches writhed as if alive, twisting and curling toward the family like sinister fingers. The glowing fruit pulsed violently, illuminating faces contorted with fear and resolve. A low hum grew to a cacophony, whispers in a language that clawed at Evelyn's mind, dredging up long-buried resentments and secrets. She felt the weight of generations pressing down, the blood pact's cruel legacy threatening to drown her in guilt and despair. "Hold fast," she whispered, gripping Lucas's arm. "We end this tonight." Lucas nodded, though his face was pale. Suddenly, with a cry, he lunged forward, knife in hand, and slashed at one of the glowing fruit. The crimson sap that oozed out hissed and evaporated like fire, and the orchard screamed, a sound so piercing and filled with anguish it made Evelyn's knees threaten to buckle. The ground trembled beneath them as if the earth itself sought to swallow them whole. Margaret stepped forward, her voice barely audible, repeating the words the family had uncovered in dusty journals and whispered lore. Her pale hands extended toward the fruit, her eyes glazed but resolute. The orchard's violent pulsing gradually slowed, the glowing fruit dimming as if exhausted from the battle. The oppressive presence lifted slightly, replaced by a fragile silence that felt less like peace and more like a tentative truce. The Holloways huddled together, breaths ragged, bodies trembling from the ordeal. Evelyn's eyes scanned the orchard, still alive, still dangerous, but less suffocating for now. "Is it over?" Lucas asked, voice trembling. "For tonight," Evelyn replied, though uncertainty lingered in her tone. "But this is only the beginning of what we must face." Reverend Marks lowered his head, the lines of guilt etched deeper into his face. Harriet jotted notes furiously, her sharp eyes never leaving the orchard as if expecting it to erupt once more. The ritual had forced the orchard to reveal itself, not just as a place, but as a sentient, hungry force bound by ancient magic and family blood. The Holloways had confronted the darkness within and without, but the cost was far from clear. Their alliance, forged in desperation, was fragile, and the secrets that surfaced threatened to unravel the tenuous bond that now held them together. As they made their way back to the family home, the orchard's eerie glow faded to a faint shimmer, like embers dying in a fire. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter around her, feeling the cold seep into her bones, a reminder that the shadows of the past and the curse's hunger were far from vanquished. Night after night, she would return to the orchard's edge, knife at her side, heart steeled against the whispers that called her back. The ritual had changed everything and nothing. The shadows of the Holloway legacy loomed larger than ever, and the fight to break free was only beginning. In the distance, the faint rustle of branches whispered secrets yet untold, and the orchard waited, patient, hungry, eternal. "Evelyn," Lucas said quietly, breaking the heavy silence as they gathered their scattered strength. "We can't let it win. Not like this." She met his gaze, the weight of their shared burden reflected in those restless eyes. "We won't. We have to be stronger than this darkness. For Margaret, for all of us." Margaret's pale hand found Evelyn's, her touch fragile but grounding. The youngest siblings trance-lifted, and with it, a flicker of hope. But as the wind stirred the orchard's branches once more, Evelyn knew the shadows would test them again. And when they did, they would have to be ready. The cellar was colder than Evelyn had expected, the chill seeping through the cracked stone walls and settling deep in her bones. She knelt down, her fingers trembling slightly as she brushed away layers of dust from a battered wooden chest nestled against the far wall. The air smelled of mildew and forgotten memories, a scent that stirred something ancient and uneasy within her. She pried open the chest, a faint creak echoing in the silence. Inside lay a disarray of yellowed papers, brittle and fragile with age. Evelyn's heart pounded as she carefully lifted the topmost document, the faint glow of her flashlight illuminating an ornate heading. The Holloway Blood Pact, circa 1723. Her breath hitched as she scanned the faded script. The words revealing the desperate bargains struck by their ancestors' bargains, sealed in blood and shadow. The pact was no mere myth. It was a binding contract with the orchard itself, a living entity sustained by sacrifice and pain. The fruit, the midnight bloom, the hunger writ, was all part of a cycle older than the town, older than the family. Upstairs, footsteps approached, tentative but deliberate. Evelyn's pulse quickened as Reverend Caleb Marks entered the parlor, his gaunt frame silhouetted against the dim light. His eyes, heavy with years of guilt, met hers. "I see you found them," he said quietly, his voice rough and burdened. "The papers?" Evelyn nodded, her fingers clutching the fragile documents. "Why didn't you tell us? Why keep this secret?" The Reverend sank into a worn armchair, the candlelight flickering across his lined face. "Because I was part of it," he confessed, voice barely above a whisper. "I was meant to protect the town, to maintain the balance. But every time a sacrifice was made, every time the orchard was fed, a piece of my soul was lost." Lucas appeared behind her, his restless eyes wide as he took in the weight of the revelation. Margaret followed, her pale face etched with fear but also a flicker of understanding. The glowing fruit outside seemed to pulse in response, as if the orchard itself was aware of their discovery. Harriet Bell leaned in, her voice low and urgent. "The town's history is stained with this darkness. The orchard listens, it waits. It feeds not just on blood, but on guilt and secrets." The family sat in silence, the enormity of the curse pressing down like a physical weight. Evelyn's mind raced with the implications. Breaking the pact would not be simple, it would demand sacrifice, courage, and perhaps a surrender they were not prepared to make. Yet, as the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, a fierce resolve took root within her. The orchard's hunger would not consume them without a fight. But the path ahead was shrouded in shadows, and the cost of freedom might be more than any of them could bear. The night had revealed the truth. Now the Holloways had to decide whether to embrace their haunted legacy or shatter it forever. And somewhere deep in the orchard, the fruit glowed brighter, as if mocking their defiance. Evelyn closed the chest gently, determination hardening in her gaze. The secrets were unveiled, but the battle was only beginning. She glanced once more at the faded documents, whispering a vow to the restless night: "We will break this curse, or die trying." The orchard waited, patient and eternal, its hunger far from sated. The night had dragged on, heavy with a silence that was less peaceful and more waiting for something inevitable, something terrible. The orchard outside the Holloway estate pulsed faintly in the darkness, its eerie fruit glowing like eyes, waiting for its next offering. Evelyn sat by the window, her sharp features tense, eyes fixed on the shifting light among the twisted branches. She bit her lip, the taste of iron and dread thick on her tongue. The others were asleep, pretending to be, but she felt the weight of the curse pressing in, relentless and cold. Suddenly, a noise shattered the fragile quiet. The creak of branches, a scraping sound, then the heavy thud of footsteps on dry earth. Evelyn's heart leaped. She grabbed the knife she kept under her pillow and bolted to the door. "Lucas," she called, voice tight and urgent. The door swung open, and there he was, staggering forward with his clothes torn and stained with a strange glowing sap that seemed to shimmer even in the faint moonlight. His breath came in ragged gasps, eyes wild and unfocused. What happened?" Evelyn demanded as she rushed to his side, grabbing his arm. Lucas shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I went in," he said simply. "Had to know, had to see." "You were warned," Evelyn said, but the fear in her voice was clear. "You could have died out there." He shrugged off her grip and sank to the floor, the glowing sap dripping from his sleeves onto the wooden porch. "It's like the orchard. It's alive," Lucas whispered. "It's waiting, watching, it knows." Inside, the family gathered quickly, the urgency of the moment breaking down their usual silences. Margaret clung to Evelyn's side, her pale face drawn tight with worry. Reverend Caleb Marks and Harriet Bell were summoned, their faces grave as they took in the scene. The conversation that followed was heated and raw. Evelyn's voice wavered as she tried to hold the family together, to chart a course through the madness that had invaded their lives. Lucas's reckless defiance sparked anger and fear. Margaret's whispered warnings unsettled them all. Margaret's visions had deepened shadows bound to the orchard's roots. Blood spilled in ancient rituals, fire consuming everything. "If we try to break the curse," she said softly, "the orchard will demand a price, a terrible one." Reverend Marks nodded solemnly. "The pact is old, and the hunger is relentless. We cannot simply walk away." Harriet Bell added, "The town has lived in uneasy truce with it for generations. The Holloways were always the price keepers." The weight of their legacy pressed down on Evelyn harder than ever. To fight meant risking everything, including each other. To surrender meant losing themselves piece by piece to an insatiable hunger. As dawn crept across the horizon, the orchard's glow dimmed but did not fade, a reminder that the nightmare was far from over. The family faced the breaking point, caught between desperate hope and crushing despair, with the future hanging precariously in the balance. The next steps would define them all, whether they would break the cycle or be consumed by it. And the orchard waited, patient and hungry, beneath the dimming light of day. The heavy air of the Holloway estate was thick with anticipation as the family gathered around the ancient oak table, scarred by time and secrets. Papers rustled softly beneath trembling fingers' yellowed pages, inked with the faded words of ancestors who had once danced on the same knife's edge between salvation and damnation. Evelyn's eyes flitted over the ritual instructions once more, the candlelight throwing sharp shadows across her determined face. She swallowed hard, feeling the oppressive weight of the orchard's curse settle like a stone in her chest. "We don't have much time," Reverend Caleb Marks said in a voice roughened by years of regret. He stood near the hearth, his gaunt frame silhouetted against the flickering flames. "The orchard's bloom will reach its peak at midnight. After that, the pact demands its due, one way or another. His eyes, sunken but piercing, met Evelyn's. This ritual, if performed correctly, might sever the bond. But the price, it's never without cost. Harriet Bell sat nearby, her wiry fingers clutching a notebook filled with hastily scrawled observations and local lore. "I've combed through the town records," she murmured, "and every family that tried to break the pact suffered losses. Sometimes the orchard takes more than it should." Lucas, restless as ever, ran a hand through his scruffy hair, his usually defiant eyes now clouded with worry. "We can't just give in, not after everything." Margaret, pale and trembling, whispered, "The fruit, it's already pulsing, like a heartbeat, like it knows what's coming." Evelyn nodded solemnly. "We protect each other. We do this together." The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the distant, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to rise from the orchard itself. It was a low, rhythmic pulse, an eerie glow filtering through the cracked windows and painting the peeling walls with shades of ghostly green and crimson. The forbidden fruit hung heavy on the branches outside, their surfaces gleaming with an unnatural light that seemed to throb in time with the heavy beats in Evelyn's chest. "We'll begin at the stroke of midnight," Reverend Marks said, pulling a worn, leather-bound book from beneath his robes. "Each of you must be prepared to face what comes not just the orchard, but yourselves. The ritual demands sacrifice, truth, and the courage to confront the darkness within." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the knife she kept hidden beneath her pillow, a habit born of years of fear and necessity. "I'm ready," she said, voice steady despite the storm of doubt swirling beneath her calm exterior. As the hours dragged on, the family rehearsed the ritual's steps, the air heavy with whispered prayers and the rustling of ancient parchment. Harriet's notes offered fragmented clues, half-forgotten incantations and warnings that seemed to twist and writhe like the orchard's gnarled branches themselves. Reverend Mark's presence was a constant reminder of the fine line they walked between salvation and destruction. Outside, the orchard's glow intensified, the fruit's pulsing light growing stronger, casting long, twisted shadows across the estate's overgrown grounds. The scent of ripe fruit, sickly sweet and faintly metallic, seeped through the cracked windows, an intoxicating lure that promised both life and oblivion. In the final moments before midnight, Evelyn gathered her siblings close. Lucas's rebellious spark had dimmed, replaced by a solemn determination. Margaret's wide eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her connection to the orchard more palpable than ever. "Whatever happens," Evelyn whispered, "we face it together, no matter the cost." The clock began its slow, haunting toll, each chime echoing like a death knell. The orchard's glow reached a feverish pitch, the fruit vibrating with an energy that seemed almost alive, almost sentient. As the last bell rang, the family stepped outside into the cold night, the orchard looming before them like a beast waiting to be tamed or to devour. The air crackled with ancient magic and raw fear. Their hearts pounded, not just with the blood that fed the cursed soil beneath their feet, but with the fragile hope that tonight, the price of freedom might finally be paid. And yet, as the ritual began, shadows lengthened and secrets whispered on the wind, leaving a chilling question hanging in the midnight air. Would this night mark the end of the curse, or the beginning of a deeper, darker hunger? The orchard waited, its glowing fruit pulsing with relentless hunger, as the Holloways braced themselves for the ultimate reckoning. The orchard was eerily still beneath the midnight sky, the usual hum of glowing fruit replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Evelyn's hands trembled as she gripped the ancient dagger. its blade dulled by time but sharp enough for the task ahead. Around her, the twisted branches of the orchard curled like skeletal fingers, their luminous fruit casting a dim, unsettling light that flickered with a life of its own. Lucas lay on the mossy ground, his breath shallow and ragged, blood staining his torn shirt. His eyes met Evelyn's, a mix of fear and fierce determination shining through despite his weakening state. Margaret hovered nearby, clutching a small bundle of wilted glowing fruit, whispering incantations she barely understood. Reverend Caleb Marks and Harriet Bell stood at the edges of the grove, their faces etched with solemn dread. "This is the only way," Evelyn whispered, voice breaking. "The orchard demands a price, and if we don't give it, it will tear us apart." The knife felt heavier than ever as she raised it, the cold metal biting into her palm. Memories of past nights flooded her mind, the visions, the warnings, the relentless hunger gnawing at their souls. She glanced at her siblings, their faces pale and strained, shadows of the family she once knew. "Lucas," she said, voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall, "you're the sacrifice that can end this. You have to be strong." He nodded faintly, a ghost of a smile flickering. "For you, for all of us." The first cut was shallow, a mere puncture to draw blood, but the orchard responded immediately. The fruit's glow intensified, pulsating in sync with the trickling crimson. A low, almost mournful hum rose from the trees, wrapping around them like a shroud. As the blood seeped into the earth, the twisted branches seemed to recoil, the suffocating presence easing ever so slightly. "Keep going," Reverend Marks intoned, voice grave but steady. "The pact must be honored, but we guide the terms." Evelyn's hands steadied, slicing deeper, each movement measured and resolute. Lucas winced but did not cry out. The pain, a small price against the monstrous hunger that had threatened to consume them all. Margaret's whispers grew louder, a chant weaving through the trees, calling for mercy and release. Harriet scribbled furiously in her notebook, recording every detail, her eyes darting nervously between the family and the orchard's shifting shadows. "It's working," she murmured, voice barely audible. "The glow is fading." But the fading light brought no relief to Evelyn's heart. The sacrifice was real, and the cost was etched deep into their flesh and souls. The orchard's pulse slowed, its hunger momentarily sated. Yet a lingering chill suggested this was but a pause in an ancient, relentless cycle. As dawn's first light threatened to spill over the horizon, Evelyn knelt beside Lucas, clutching his hand tightly. "We did what we had to," she whispered, tears finally spilling free. "But I don't know if this is freedom or just another prison." The orchard stood silent now, its eerie glow reduced to faint embers. Yet the shadows it cast stretched long and ominous across the family's weary faces. They were survivors, but at what price? Evelyn rose, eyes scanning the dimming grove. The legacy of the Holloways was a burden heavier than any could have imagined, one that would haunt their days and nights forever. But for now, the orchard was quiet, and in that fragile silence lay a tentative hope, fragile, uncertain, but alive. "We keep moving forward," Evelyn said, voice firm despite the weight upon her. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The orchard's dark secret had been fed, but the true battle for their souls was only just beginning. Dawn crept slowly over the horizon, casting pale light through the skeletal branches of the orchard. Evelyn stood at its edge, her fingers tightening around the cold metal of the knife she'd kept beneath her pillow since their return. The ritual was over, the violent midnight bloom quelled, but the air remained thick with the scent of damp earth, rotting leaves, and the faintest metallic temps that echoed the blood spilled in desperate sacrifice. The glowing fruit that had once bathed the orchard in an eerie, natural light was now dim, scattered like dying embers across gnarled limbs. Yet the orchard did not feel silent. It pressed against Evelyn's skin, a suffocating presence that whispered of unfinished business and lingering hunger. She swallowed hard, her sharp eyes scanning the darkened trees as if expecting them to stir, to awaken and demand more. Behind her, the creak of the porch floor announced Lucas's arrival. He moved with a heavy gait, the bruises on his arms fading, but his restless eyes shadowed by memories that could not be washed away. "It's quieter," he murmured, voice rough, "but it doesn't feel over." Evelyn nodded, the weight of leadership settling back onto her shoulders. "We did what we could. We have to believe it's enough." Lucas didn't answer. He stared out into the orchard, where pale fruit hung like ghosts, their glow reduced to mere whispers. The siblings' fragile alliance had been tested and frayed through months of fear, visions, and desperate actions. The scars weren't only on their skin, but etched deep into their souls. Inside the family home, dust motes danced in shafts of weak sunlight filtering through grimy windows. Lucas slumped into an old armchair, the worn fabric a poor comfort against the storm inside him. His hands trembled as he traced the fading bruises, guilt and regret gnawing at his conscience. He had been reckless, driven by a hunger to understand and defy the orchard, yet his actions had nearly cost them everything. Nearby, Margaret sat perched on a threadbare couch, clutching a brittle branch she had taken from the orchard during one of her trances. Her pale face was drawn, her wide eyes haunted by visions she couldn't shut out. She whispered to the branch softly, as if confiding in it the secrets the others refused to hear. Her connection to the orchard had deepened in ways none fully understood, and with it, her role as the family's uneasy seer grew heavier. The house was silent before their breathing and the distant creak of settling wood. No one spoke of what had been lost, the sacrifices made, or the uncertain future that stretched before them like a shadow. Trust had become fragile, a threadbare fabric that threatened to unravel at the slightest tug. Miles away, in a small chapel cloaked in shadows, Reverend Caleb Marks knelt before the altar. His gaunt face was etched with lines of guilt and weariness as his lips moved in muted prayer. The burden of the pact and his role in its perpetuation weighed heavily upon him, a moral conflict that no amount of supplication could ease. Behind him, the faint rustle of pages turning marked Harriet Bell's presence in the back pew. Her sharp eyes, usually filled with biting curiosity, now reflected a somber understanding. She clutched her notebook tightly, its pages filled with cryptic notes and half-remembered histories of the orchard's dark past and the family's cursed bloodline. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, caught between fear and reluctant acceptance. The orchard's grip had loosened but not vanished, its legacy woven into the very fabric of the land and the people who lived there. As twilight descended once more, a cold wind swept through the orchard. The skeletal branches creaked and groaned, stirring the fallen leaves into restless swells. The Holloway siblings gathered beneath the barren boughs, shadows long and distorted under the fading light. Evelyn's voice broke the heavy silence. "We survived," she said, though the words sounded fragile even to her own ears. "But survival isn't freedom. We have to be ready for whatever comes next." Lucas looked at her, eyes burning with a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. "Can we ever be free?" Margaret's whisper was barely audible. "The orchard doesn't forget." The orchard stood silent, its eerie glow extinguished, but its presence a chilling reminder that some legacies refuse to die. The Holloways faced an uncertain future, bound by blood and shadow, their family forever tethered to the haunted soil beneath their feet. And as the night deepened, the orchard waited. The days that followed were a restless limbo. The Holloway house, once filled with the chaotic energy of discovery and fear, now felt hollow and stale. Evelyn moved through the rooms with a careful tread, her mind a labyrinth of guilt and determination. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows, reminded her that the orchard's curse was a living thing, watching, waiting. Lucas retreated into himself, wrestling with the consequences of his recklessness. His impulsive venture into the orchard had nearly cost him his life and fractured the fragile trust between him and Evelyn. The siblings exchanged few words, their conversations clipped and weighed down by unspoken blame. Margaret's visions grew more frequent and vivid. She saw flickers of faces ancestors long dead, their eyes hollow and accusing. In her dreams, the orchard spoke, a voice like rustling leaves and distant thunder, demanding reckoning. She confided in Harriet Bell during rare visits, the old woman offering cryptic guidance tempered by her own fears. Reverend Marks remained a distant figure, his presence a reminder of the town's complicated history with the Holloways. His prayers and warnings underscored the moral ambiguity of the pact, not merely of survival, but of shared guilt and sacrifice. The town's whispers continued, a low murmur beneath the surface of everyday life. The orchard was no longer the glowing enigma it had been, but its shadow stretched far beyond its twisted branches. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Evelyn found herself standing alone at the orchard's edge once more. The air was chill and still, the darkness folding around her like a shroud. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of earth and decay, steel and sorrow. "Is this the end?" she whispered to the night. No answer came, only the silence. The orchard waited, and so did the